These were the biggest trucks America ever built, not the trucks you passed on the interstate. The trucks that built the interstate, machines the size of a two-story house hauling 100 tons of rock out of an open pit in a single pass. They worked the great dams, the strip mines, the open-cut coal fields, and the enormous earth-moving projects that remade the shape of the country after the Second World War. And one company built more of them than everyone else in America combined. At its peak, better than half of every off-highway hauler working in the United States carried its name on the nose. This company did not just lead the market, it invented the market. It owned the market. And then, at the exact moment it stood on top of the entire industry, the government of the United States took it apart. Not a foreign competitor, not a market crash, not a failed product. A lawsuit, one antitrust case that ended with this company being broken off, sold away, and stripped of its own name. And the strangest part is that nobody ever beat it by building a better truck. This is the story of Euclid, the story of the biggest trucks in America, and a company that was taken apart at the height of its success. And it begins in a small town in Ohio. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what an off-highway truck actually is, because most people have never stood next to one. A highway truck is built to a limit. It has to fit in a lane. It has to obey a weight law. It has to share the road with a family sedan. An off-highway truck obeys none of that. It never touches a public road in its working life. It is built for the pit, the quarry, and the mine, and it is built to one single specification, which is to move the largest possible quantity of earth and rock from one point to another as many times a day as the machine can physically endure. In the 1930s, that machine did not really exist. If you wanted to move rock, you loaded it into a converted highway dump truck that broke down under the weight, or you moved it with rail and steam shovels, the way it had been done for 50 years. The company that changed this was born in Euclid, Ohio, just outside Cleveland, and it took the name of the town. The Euclid Road Machinery Company was run by the Armington family, a family of Ohio engineers who had been building heavy machinery since the early years of the century. They looked at the converted highway trucks failing in the pits, and they asked a simple question. What if you built a truck that was never intended to touch a road at all? In the mid-1930s, they answered it. They built one of the first true off-highway haulers ever made, a machine designed from the ground up for the pit. It threw away every assumption that came from the highway. Heavier frame, bigger tires, a dump body designed for rock rather than gravel. It was not elegant. It was a tool built for one job, and it did that job better than anything that had come before it. And here is the tension that will drive everything that follows. Euclid was about to become so successful, so completely dominant in the category it had invented, that its own success would one day be turned into the case against it in a federal courtroom. Through the late 1930s and into the 1940s, Euclid did to earth moving what a handful of companies do once in a generation. It defined the standard. When the Second World War came, the demand for earth moving was enormous. Airfields, ports, roads and bases had to be carved out of jungle and desert at a speed that had never been attempted. The military needed machines that could move mountains, and Euclid equipment went to work around the world, alongside the bulldozers and the scrapers. Euclid tripled its production during the war years. By the time the fighting ended, an entire generation of construction men had learned their trade on Euclid machines, and they came home wanting more of them. The post-war years were the greatest construction boom in American history. The interstate highway system, the great hydroelectric dams, the expansion of open pit mining and strip coal on a scale the country had never seen. Every one of those projects ran on off-highway trucks, and more often than not, those trucks were Euclids. By the early 1950s, the numbers were staggering. By the most widely cited figures, Euclid was building better than half of all the off-highway dump trucks sold in the United States. In a young and rapidly growing industry, one company held more of the market than every competitor combined. The name Euclid had become a generic term in the pits. Men did not say they were driving a hauler. They said they were driving a UC. This is the position that attracts attention. And in 1953, it attracted the attention of the largest industrial corporation on Earth, General Motors was already the biggest company in the world. It built cars, trucks, locomotives, and diesel engines. What it did not have was a strong position in earth-moving equipment, and earth-moving was clearly the future of post-war construction. So General Motors did what a corporation of that size does. It did not build a competitor to Euclid. It simply bought Euclid outright. And here are the numbers that show exactly what General Motors was buying. When the deal closed, Euclid was a $33 million business with 1,600 employees, turning out around 170 trucks a month and holding better than half the nation's off-highway dump truck market. General Motors paid a price reported at roughly $20 million and folded the whole operation in as the Euclid division of General Motors. On paper, it looked like the perfect marriage. The most dominant name in off-highway trucks, now backed by the deepest pockets and the finest engineering resources in the entire industrial world. General Motors poured its capital and its research into the division. It expanded the product line. It pushed Euclid into scrapers and loaders and every other corner of the earth-moving market. And it worked. It worked almost too well. Within a few years, the Euclid division was not just leading in trucks. It was becoming a dominant force across the whole earth-moving field, carrying the weight of the largest corporation on the planet behind it, which is exactly when a lawyer at the United States Department of Justice began pulling the market share figures and did not like what the arithmetic was telling him. The Justice Department looked at the combination of Euclid and General Motors and saw a threat, but the argument it built was more specific than simple size, and it is worth understanding because it is the hinge the whole story turns on. General Motors did not just build trucks. It built the diesel engines and the transmissions that went inside earth-moving equipment, and before 1953, it had been selling those components to Euclid's competitors. So when General Motors bought the biggest truck maker in the field, the government saw two dangers at once. First, that General Motors could now feed its own engines and transmissions into Euclid while quietly starving the rival truck makers who depended on those same components. And second, that no independent competitor, no matter how good, could ever match the financial power of General Motors standing behind Euclid. The government also pointed out that General Motors had once considered entering the earth-moving business on its own, and by simply buying the leader instead, it had erased a competitor that might otherwise have existed. The legal weapon was a law called the Clayton Act, and specifically a portion of it known as Section 7. This is the part of American antitrust law that governs acquisitions. It exists to stop a company from buying its way to a monopoly rather than competing its way there. The theory is simple. If a merger substantially lessens competition or tends to create a monopoly, the government can undo it, even years after the fact. In 1959, under Attorney General William Rogers, the government filed suit, the United States of America against General Motors Corporation, and strip away the legal language, and the case amounted to a backhanded compliment. Nobody was claiming Euclid built a bad truck. The problem was that Euclid built too good a truck, sold too many of them, and that with General Motors behind it, the government believed no independent rival could ever hope to catch up. Think about what that means for a moment, because it is the strange heart of this entire story. A great deal of the evidence against the company was, in effect, a record of how well it had done its job. Every truck sold, every point of market share won, every satisfied mine and dam and highway contractor, all of it fed a legal file describing a problem that had to be corrected. The case did not move quickly. Antitrust cases of this size rarely do. General Motors fought it for 8 years, through discovery and testimony and appeal, with a battery of corporate lawyers on one side and the resources of the federal government on the other. General Motors argued what any company would argue, that it had competed fairly, that customers chose Euclid because Euclid was better, that punishing success punished the very thing antitrust law was supposed to protect. The government held its line. The concentration was too great. The remedy had to match it. And the remedy, when it finally came, was severe. General Motors was ordered to divest. It had to give up the Euclid truck business it had bought and built into a giant, but the order did not stop there. And this is where it gets worse for General Motors than a simple sale. The corporation was barred from the off-highway hauler market in the United States for roughly 4 years, until the summer of 1972. During that window, the biggest industrial company on Earth was legally forbidden from selling the very kind of truck it had spent a fortune perfecting on its home soil, and it lost the name. General Motors could not take the Euclid name with it into the future. The trademark that had become a generic word in every pit in America, the name men used when they simply meant a big truck, was signed away in that product line. So the divestiture went through. In February of 1968, General Motors sold the Euclid truck operation to the White Motor Corporation, a truck maker based in Cleveland, not far from where Euclid had started. Euclid, the trucks and the name, went to White. And a company that had climbed to the very top of an industry it invented was cut loose from the corporation that had promised to make it invincible. But General Motors was not about to walk away from Earth moving entirely. It had been ordered to give up the hauler business and the Euclid name. It had not been ordered to give up everything. It kept the rest of the Earth moving line it had developed, the scrapers and the loaders and the crawler tractors, and it kept its plant in Hudson, Ohio, along with factories in Canada and Scotland. There was just one problem. It could not call any of it Euclid anymore. It needed a new name for a business that had been famous under a name it was no longer allowed to use. So General Motors invented one. It reached back to Latin. Terra, the earth. Rex the king, king of the earth, Terex, and now the American off-highway truck industry, which for a generation had been essentially one dominant company, was split down the middle by a court order. The Euclid name and the American truck operation went one way, to White Motor. The engineering, the capital, and the rest of the product line went the other way, reborn as Terex inside General Motors. One industry, one heritage, one body of engineering, cut in half by a lawsuit and sent in two directions at once. General Motors even kept building haulers from its Canadian and Scottish plants during the ban, unable to sell them at home, watching the American market it had once ruled from the outside. Neither half would ever again hold the position that the whole had held in 1953. Here is the part that turns this from a business story into something closer to a tragedy. The whole purpose of an antitrust case is to protect competition, and through it, to protect American industry and the American consumer. The government looked at Euclid under General Motors and decided that this concentration of power was a threat that had to be broken up for the good of the country. That was the intention. Now follow what actually happened to the thing the lawsuit was supposed to protect. Euclid under White Motor was now a mid-sized division inside a truck company that had its own financial troubles. It no longer had the bottomless capital of General Motors behind it. It had to compete against Caterpillar, against the very Terex that had just been carved out of it, and against a rising tide of foreign builders, all on a much thinner budget than it had enjoyed for the previous 15 years. The company never again reached the standing it had held before the General Motors years. Most of this story was never written down anywhere you can easily find it. The men who ran these machines and built them are getting older every year, and the industrial history of this country is quietly disappearing with them. If you want to help keep the memory of the America that actually built things alive, we are gathering these stories, the ones we tell here and the ones you share in the comments, into a book made to sit on a shelf and be passed down. There is a link in the description to reserve your copy. Now, back to the pits. Terex on the General Motors side chased the one thing General Motors always understood, which was scale. In the mid-1970s, Terex built the single most extraordinary truck in this entire story, the Terex Titan, a 350-ton hauler, powered like a locomotive, standing more than 2 stories tall, riding on tires taller than a man. For years, it was the largest truck on the planet, and only one was ever built. It went to work in a coal mine in British Columbia, and it became a legend, a monument to what the General Motors half of this divided heritage could still do when it wanted to prove a point. But a single record-breaking machine does not make a market. And through the 1970s and 80s, General Motors slowly lost interest in earthmoving. On the first day of 1981, it sold the Terex division to a German holding company. Within about 2 years, that company had collapsed into one of the largest bankruptcies in West German history, and Terex was cut loose again to survive on its own. The Euclid half fared no better as an American possession. White Motor, struggling with its own finances, sold Euclid to Daimler-Benz of Germany in 1977, so the most American of names, born in a small Ohio town, was now owned in Stuttgart. From there, it kept moving, through Clark Equipment, through a joint venture with Volvo of Sweden, and finally into the hands of Hitachi of Japan. And here is the loop closing on the very first thing I told you. The name Euclid, the name that once meant the biggest trucks in America, the name that better than half the industry once carried, was quietly retired around 2004 when its last owner folded it into a Japanese brand. The trucks it had invented are still made. They just carry Japanese and Swedish names now. Follow the whole arc. A lawsuit filed to protect American competition took the dominant American company in an industry, split it in two, weakened both halves, and set them drifting until the American names on the biggest trucks in the country had been replaced, one, by the names of foreign owners. The government did not lose the case, it won. That is the hard part. It won the argument that Euclid and General Motors together were too powerful. And in winning, the split it forced set in motion a slow unwinding that ended with the whole thing in foreign hands. And notice who never actually beat Euclid on the merits. No rival built a truck so much better that customers abandoned the brand. No foreign company out-engineered it in open competition in those peak years. The thing that took Euclid off the top of the mountain was not a better machine. It was a courtroom. A company that could not be beaten in the pit was undone by a legal theory, and by the time the paperwork was finished, the momentum of an entire American industry had been scattered to owners on 3 different continents. The town of Euclid, Ohio, that had given the trucks their name, would never again be the center of the industry it had created. There is a lesson buried in this, and it is not a comfortable one. We usually tell the story of American industrial decline as a story of foreign competition, of companies that got lazy, or products that got worse. This is not that story. Euclid did not get lazy. Its product did not get worse. It was, by every measure that mattered in the pit, the best at what it did. It was broken up at the peak of its excellence by its own government, in the name of protecting a competition it could not put back together afterward. Whether that was the right call is a question people still argue about. Antitrust law exists for good reasons, and unchecked corporate power is a real danger. There is a serious argument that General Motors, controlling both the trucks and the engines inside its rivals' trucks, was exactly the kind of concentration the law was written to stop. But when you stand at the old ground in Euclid, Ohio, and you know that the biggest trucks in America now carry names from Sweden and Japan, it is fair to ask what exactly was protected and what was simply lost. If you ever ran a Euclid, worked in a pit alongside one, or grew up hearing your father talk about the biggest trucks in America, drop a comment and tell me which machine and which job. We are building the largest archive of American industrial history on this platform, and the men who built and drove these giants deserve to be remembered properly. If this story mattered to you, hit subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.